Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. My brother, I'm sure he has a plan to deal with the dragons too, he asked with a chuckle. He does? Quentyn said proudly. Which is? He asked, and watched as his nephew took a defensive stance. Another time, uncle. Come, we should set off as soon as we can. Quentyn said, and he nodded. Tomorrow, nephew. The best of the day is gone, and you've only arrived. Rest up and we leave on the morrow, he said, smiling, as Quentyn nodded. You have the right of it, uncle. We'll feast tonight, Quentyn asked. As much as any army can, nephew, he laughed. He walked his nephew from the tent and noticed it immediately. Once he did, more and more Yadrinwood men had gathered near his tent, Sir Cletus and Sir Archibald, relaxing once they saw the smile on Quentyn's face. Naim, Tayin, see that Quentyn is settled? Obara, speak to the lords, we march on the morrow, Oberyn said, slapping his nephew warmly on the back and walking back into the tent. The letter still in his hand, and he felt his anger rise before he heard the bird chirp once more. You heard it all? He said, and the bird chirped once. My spear is yours, nephew. Oberyn said to a loud chirp, which made him smile. He spoke to Tiny later that night, his daughter telling him that Quentyn went to speak to Anders Euronwood before him. Oberyn was not surprised. The plan becoming clearer to him now, the feast was more like a large dinner, yet Oberyn noticed where Quentyn sat and who sat with him. His army was full of traitors that needed to be weeded out. When he met with his daughters for their morning spar the next day, he made his thoughts clear. Your uncle and cousin are traitors to Dorne, I believe Euronwood is too, but I know not who else. We must root them out and ready ourselves. The Stormlords are our only certain allies, he said, and the girls nodded. We wait, father, Obar asked. Like snakes in the grass, ready to strike, he said with a smirk. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken, his daughters said, and he nodded. The Battle of the God's Eye, 29-8 AC. Aegon, before the parley, seeing the bastard who claimed to be his brother was infuriating. That he looked nothing like him, or his father should have been enough to prove him false. Yet it had not, and he had more to paint him a bastard. True, than Aegon a true-born son had. His armor was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The steel was, or at least looked Valyrian. The black plate and the rubies were a clear attempt to make it look like the armor his father wore. Were that all, it would have been enough, but on his hip rested a sword he knew all too well. He had Darksister. He had the blade of Visenya, of Aemon the Dragon Knight, and Daemon, of the Conciliator he claimed to be named for. On his head he wore the crown of the Conqueror, his crown by right and blood. Behind him walked 4 men in white cloaks, and while 2 were unknown to him, 2 were anything but. Tharistan the Bold stood at his right shoulder and Sarkar Dane on his left, the sword of the morning standing by a bastard pretender. All of it. All of them. They should be his. He was the king. Rhaegar's true-born son. His heir. Yet, while he'd hidden in the shadows, this bastard had come along and stolen everything from him, and now he wished to steal his birthright. No, he'd not have it. He'd not allow it. He put him in his place, to then see him call out the usurper, to claim he was acting for his father, for his mother and sister. The sheer nerve of the bastard. We cannot allow him to take more from me. No more, I say. Aegon said loudly. Illyrio and Harry Strickland looking at him. No, you must make your claim true. Aegon, but he stands in the way. Without him, the rest of them will come to us. Illyrio said. Then we end him here on this battlefield today, Harry Strickland said. Or we end him before a battle happens, he said, looking at them both. You go on, Illyrio asked. Who is your best archer? He asked, turning to Harry. Vadak, Harry said. Can we pierce his armor? He asked, and Harry nodded. We can, but this isn't honorable. What price honor? Against the lives of your men, Harry? Illyrio said, and Aegon watched as Harry nodded. He waited as Harry sent for Black Balak, Illyrio looking to him while he himself looked to the empty seat where Jon should sit. Jon will be a problem. He thinks too much of your father to see the truth. Echo, Illyrio said. I know, we can use that though, he said, and Illyrio smirked. As he rode out, he felt even more confident. His plan was sound, and Balak assured him that he'd not miss. Though Aegon knew it was more the sword on his hip that made him feel how he did. The bastard may have Visenya's blade, but he now had Aegon's. Blackfire was the sword of kings. Aegon was keen to get to use it and looked forward to having the chance to do so. There were many traitors' heads he intended to take when he was crowned. He looked to Jon and shook his head angrily, as he'd give this bastard anything but a quick death. After everything he'd stolen from him, he'd see him dead. He'd see the traitors dead, and when they had knelt and named him king, he'd see his aunt dead. He'd not forgotten what she cost him or what she'd stolen from him either. After the poorly, the things he had dared say to him a true-born king having to listen to such lies from a bastard's lips. It was true what Haldan had said. Bastards were evil, deceitful creatures who sought what wasn't theirs. He almost felt that an arrow was too good for him, that he deserved to suffer more. Were it not for the fact that he'd lose some of his strength in fighting the army at his front, Aegon would see them fight and have the bastard dragged before him. But he couldn't take the risk, and so he raised his hand and watched as the arrow flew. It almost glided slowly in the air towards the bastard's back, and he smiled when he saw it hit, only to watch on stunned when it fell harmlessly to the ground. When he saw the bastard step off his horse and look to his Kingsguard, Aegon felt nervous. They were too far to make it back to their camp, and he had Barristan and Arthur Dayne should he attack. Was he to die here? He wondered. Then he saw them ride off, and for a moment thought about ordering his men to ride the bastard down. "You've woken the dragon now. If I were you, I'd run. Run for your fucking lives, as they belong to her now," the bastard said, his voice making Aegon shiver, involuntarily. When he saw it, he couldn't believe it. The dragon made Beleriand look like a lizard. It was huge, white scales the color of the moon itself, and its wings the brightest blue he'd ever seen. As he rode away, he couldn't help but look back and see the dragon look his way, its purple eyes that seemed to bore into his very soul, and he'd never seen hate like that before. Was this her? And if it was, then he felt sure that she'd take his life this day. He didn't wait to see the bastard climb up on the dragon's back, nor to hear him speak in Valyrian, or for the dragon to take to the air. Instead, he rode. He rode as hard and as fast as he could, and he prayed he rode far enough to never be caught. Jaime, he loved the boy, truly, but by the gods could he be a pain in his arse and a strain on his heart. It was bad enough that he'd not only agreed to fight Robert one-on-one, but had actually been the one to suggest it. Jaime looking on nervously as he proved all the lessons he and Arthur and others had put him through were worthwhile. He'd even admired that he'd been able to stop himself from ending the stag. To be better than those who came before him was something Jaime had done his best to ensure. When he'd then offered the same thing to the false dragon, though Jaime had almost stood forward and dragged him back to the camp. Thankfully, it had not gotten to an actual fight. Though given what happened and was now sure to take place, it perhaps would have been better if it had. To break parley so clearly, no one on Westeros would follow him now. As they rode back, he made a note to himself to thank the lad who'd made Jack's armor once he returned to Lannisport, for now he had other things on his mind. Beside him, Arthur and Barristan rode to their forces, while he, Loras, and Walder rode to his. The men were formed up and ready. Mostly, seeing him ride back in, they quickly moved to fill the gaps. Form up, we ride at the signal," he shouted, as he rode down the line. He looked to see Arthur and Barristan doing the same, Lords Craighall and Baneford under their orders for the day. Once he had ensured they were ready, he looked up to see James and Rhaenys in the air. The dragon and his king, remarkably restrained, and he could only imagine what that was taking out of both of them. "Lozias, take a dozen men, ride for Taily. Tell him to bring his cavalry," he shouted. "At once, my lord," Lozier said, and Jaime watched as Bluebell rode off. "Sir Walder, you're with me," he said, and Walder nodded. They looked out and waited. Down the line, horses ready to charge. The lances were dropped, and men were ready to attack. Behind them, the archers waited for their own signals. Jaime looked to see his brothers, Arthur with Dawn drawn looking as majestic as ever, while Barristan's men looked to his eyes to be ready to charge into hell itself if needed. And Jaime hoped more than anything it would not. "He's going in," Walder said from beside him, and Jaime heard the cheers when the dragon roared. The battle plan had been simple. Jaime would take care of the elephants, and with Rhaenys would box the Golden Company in. The flames would stop their charges, break their spirits, and then Jaime and the Army of the West would do the rest. Plans for battle, though, were a tricky thing. Even if everything went how you wished it would, they never played out as you hoped. Barristan told him once, many years earlier, that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. You can predict every move a man would make on a Saivaz board, but that didn't tell you whose courage would hold or falter, what line would break or hold or allow for a multitude of other things that could go right or wrong. Would it rain? Was the ground too hard, too soft? Did you have the high ground? Even who chose the field of battle could define everything. Even when it all goes how you wish, it's all in the hands of the gods. Jaime, you win the battle and your commander falls, then you lose the war, Barristan had said. When he saw the flames come down, heard the roar of the elephants, and saw the horses begin to move their way, Jaime smiled. He looked up to the sky and saw his king was far from danger, and he smiled more broadly as he turned to his men. For our king, for King Jaehaerys, he shouted louder than he had ever shouted before. And as one, they charged, Jaehaerys Targaryen. He had held his anger well during the parley he felt, though everything in him was telling him to drag the mummer from the horse and end him right there. That he felt her in his head, wishing it too, only making the fire threaten to overwhelm him. As they rode away and he heard the twang of the bowstring and felt the arrow crash harmlessly against his armor, he knew his, and more precisely her, anger would not be contained. I'll fucking burn them all. Now, Jay, we go now. Rhaegar said in his head, and Jay knew he couldn't hold her back any longer. Now, he said. He gave Jaime and Arthur the nod, and they rode off, and he dismounted and turned, telling them what they'd done as he felt her above him. Rhaenys had insisted she wouldn't stay on the ground when he parleyed. Not this time. This time she'd be in the air and close by. That she wished to get to him was all that stopped her from laying her flames down on them as they retreated. The dragon instead landing to make sure he was unharmed, and Jade climbed up on her back. You are unhurt. Did they hurt you? She asked worriedly. I am unhurt, sister. I've taken measures to make sure no one can hurt either of us, he said, and felt her relief. Good Jade. No quarter. We give them no quarter, she said angrily. No quarter, he said as they took to the sky. She wished to go now, but he had her wait. He needed to give Jaime and the others time to ready themselves. They had forced him into a battle here today, and they would get one they'd remember for a long time, one he'd not leave to chance. Their plans were already sound, and it was time for the hammer to strike. Closing his eyes, he reached out, finding the doors, the elephants ready to be deployed, and he bid them charge. Perzies, Aenogar, Ranix, fire and blood, Ranix, he shouted as she began to fly towards the Golden Company. He saw them below him, infantry, archers, cavalry, all scrambling to ready themselves, and as he flew over them, Jay saw the elephants tearing through tents and their own men. He passed them, and was soon at the main force of the Golden Company, looking through Rhaegar's eyes to see they were now between those scrambling at the front and the carnage the elephants were causing. Dracarys, he said, and Rhaenys let her flames free. It started as a wide arc, and unlike the plans he had made where it would force men to move, scare them, and take their will, these flames were far more deadly. Jaehaerys was stunned both at the intensity of Rhaegar's flames and for how long she was able to keep them up. So much so that when she stopped, he had to ask her how much it had taken out of her. Nothing, brother, nothing at all, Rhaegar said. Dracarys, he said as they turned to fly over a different section. The flames cut through a line of spearmen as if they were nothing. Ga seeing men burn to ash, and men who'd not been so lucky. The screams as they burned alive were something he could hear over the panicked shouts and even the horses as they moved to run away. Looking out to where his own men were, he saw them charging, and so he turned to see what they were facing. The cavalry and infantry force moving against them was less than a quarter of Jay's own, and though he wished to take them too, he saw more men form up at the back of the camp. Zero Rhaenys, Mizemi Zero Drain, them ya rain. We take them, he said, pointing to the cavalry. Raiding at the back, and almost in the blink of an eye he was flying over them, Dracarys. He felt sorry for the horses, though nothing at all for the men who sat their backs. Rhaegar's flames, though not making a distinction. Once he'd done another pass and he saw horses on fire, he had her give them a far more peaceful death, her flames ending them quickly. Closing his eyes, he looked to the doors once more. The elephants had shaken men from their back, ran through tents, and trampled men, and Jay had sent them far from the field towards the God's Eye itself. Feeling his sister's tiredness, he opened his eyes and took another pass. Watching as his cavalry's charge easily dealt with the Golden Companies, Jane Sierra flying over to see a shield wall hastily try to be formed, and as he did so, the men threw down their shields and ran. Rhaenys' bloodlust and flames dimmed for now as they flew to check on their own forces. Arthur's white cloak was blood-stained, and Dawn bore the marks of whatever lives she'd taken, but looking through Rhaenys' eyes, he could see the knight was unharmed, as was both Barristan, and to his relief, Jaime too, Walder was the only one off his horse. But Jameson could see that while the horse may have taken an injury, his knight did not. For a brief moment, he worried about Loras not seeing his friend anywhere before Rhaegar reminded him that he'd gone to bring Tarly to them. They took one more flight over the Golden Company, the devastation left in their wake clearer to see now. Jachin had not wished another field of fire. He'd hoped it wouldn't come to this, even though he always knew he'd need to use the dragons at some point. But he had feared what it would mean and how people would think of him. How those he cared about would think of him. Would they think of him as a monster like his grandfather, or a conqueror like Aegon? Would she think him a monster? No, little brother, they'll think you a king, a dragon lord, and they'll fear you as much as they respect you. Fear is good, it'll protect you and those you love. Had they feared us more, then we'd not have so few of our family alive today. Rain said. Thank you, Ray, for this, for everything, he said softly. Come, I'm hungry, she said as she flew in the direction of the elephants. Jay not denying her what she wished for. She gorged herself on them, and Jay let her. While he'd not wished to burn them, he had no true use for them, and at least they'd serve to keep his sister fed. Some of them ran, but Jay opened the doors and led them towards his men. It wouldn't only be food for today that Rhaegar would need. As he looked at Rhaegar, he saw a man crawling off in the distance. Jay climbing down from her and running after him. Please, please, Harry Strickland said, and Jay crashed his boot against his head before dragging the unconscious man back to Rhaegar's side. He'd get what information he could out of him and then take his head. This man he'd have no trouble swinging the sword on. Struggling to drag him up, Rhaegar's wing. Once he was ready, he flew back to the battlefield, landing as soon as he got there to see Jaime, Arthur, and Barristan walking towards him. He pushed Harry from her back and heard the thump when he hit the ground, and then climbed down to find out the extent of their victory and of their losses. Illyrio! They should have charged them, not used a single arrow. Yes, they'd have been even more clearly shown to have broken parley, but given what was coming for them, he shuddered. Ekin had wanted the Kingsguard, and he'd gotten so wrapped up in the symbol of what they'd bring to his son's reign, that he'd lost all sense of reason and agreed. Now, not only would they not get the Kingsguard or the trappings that the boy wore, they'd be lucky to escape this day with their lives. A dragon. Where did he get a damn dragon? He had thought the ones the princess had were the only in existence. Had hoped that once she died, and die she would, that Aegon would end up with hers. And now he found himself riding for his life away from one that was far bigger than even they. Beside him, Aegon panicked, Harry almost cried, and Black Bollock shook his head. They rode fast, and though the Golden Company was forming up, the men beside him had no intention of fighting this war any longer. Call the men, sound the retreat. Harry Strickland shouted. How dare you, my army marches forward. We take him and his dragon. Eddie Yeag shouted, and though his son was trying to sound firm and in control, Illyrio could hear the panic in his voice. I'm not fighting against a dragon. Harry shouted. Rue looked back over his shoulder and saw the dragon was in the air, its size not diminished at all by this fact. Yet it had not attacked, and that gave them time, if nothing else. You heard him? He'll offer no parley now, fight or die, or run, and he'll chase and take us down. Illyrio said when they reached as far away as he was comfortable with. I'll not fight a fucking dragon. Harry said, shaking his head. We have no choice, Illyrio speaks true. We fight or we die. We tried to kill him, and now he and his dragon come for us. Forward not back is our only hope. Sarah Franklin said, Against a dragon? Lord Buckler said, He'll not use it against his own men. Here we're fucked. Out there on the field we may have a chance. Loswell Peak said. He has the right of it, Balak said, and Illyrio was glad to see them ride off, Harry to his elephants and the others to their positions. When Aegon made to join them, Illyrio shook his head. For them this battle was over, and should they stay then they'd lose the war also. Where's Jon? Duck said, and Illyrio shook his head. Out there, either with them or dead. We cannot stay here. We ride, he said, and both Aegon and Duck looked at him angrily. I am their king. I must lead my army, Aegon said. We can't leave them to fight and just run, Duck said. The battle is lost, we stay, and we lose our lives, and this war, we ride or die, he said. And when the dragon roared, the choice was made for them. They rode to their tents, and Illyrio called his guards. Around the men hurried to ready for the fight to come, while he calmly covered himself in the poorer clothing and grabbed his sword. When he heard the screams, he knew the fight was already underway. Mounting up, they rode east and rode hard, and he hoped they could outrun a dragon. Jon Connington, they had tried to kill him in the middle of a parley. They tried to kill Rhaegar's son, and it all became clear to him then. Protect him, Jon. Protect our son from the Black Dragon. The voice he had longed to hear for so long was once again in his head, and were the situation less serious than it was then, he'd have taken time to enjoy it. He looked back to see Jacaerys climb on the dragon's back, looking every inch the true dragon that he was. Then he turned to look behind him, and Jon saw the battle was still about to take place. The men were fools, they would die here today, and Jon felt his anger rise. Aegon, Illyrio, Varys, all of them, they had lied to him and caused him to lose his honor serving a false dragon. A mummer, a lie. They had made him wish to see Rhaegar's sister die, plot to see her killed, and Jon had not thought anything wrong with it. So eager was he to put this lie on the throne that he'd done as Rhaegar had said, he'd besmirched the memory of his Silver Prince. When the dragon flew over him, Jon knew he had no choice. Men would die here today, and there was nothing he could do about that. All he could do was see the man responsible died too. Could he, though? Illyrio. He could kill with his bare hands, but could he bring himself to kill Aegon, to see him dead, the boy he'd raised, the boy he'd thought of as his son? As he watched the dragon burn man and beast, as he looked at the Golden Company go up in flames, he thought he could. He rode through what could only be described as one of the seven hells. Around him, men burned, horses burned. He heard the screams and shouts as steel melted just as Jacaerys had said it would. Help me! Kill me! It burns. The voices intermingled with one another as men died, some of them far too slowly. Still, the flames fell as the dragon took another pass, and how he himself was not hit he couldn't tell. When he heard the sound of the horses behind him, Jon knew the end would at least come quicker to some of these men, and the dragon would then move on. He was unsurprised to reach Illyrio's tent and find he'd gone, so he too rode away from the destruction behind him. A part of him wished to ride back, to kneel and look into the eyes of Rhaegar's heir, to accept his judgment and welcome the blade if it came, as long as it came from him, to speak to Arthur and Barristan one last time, and should he be lucky enough to hear them tell him what he already knew, hearing from their lips that Jacaerys was all they had hoped Rhaegar would be, Jon could die happy with that knowledge. But he could not. He couldn't leave them out there, take the chance they'd escape and plot against him some more. No, his path lay ahead. He had ridden hard and been forced to hide more than once, the forces now riding toward the God's Eye, bearing banners he knew all too well. The seahorse of House Velaryon, the blue swordfish of Bar Ammon, the red crabs of Celtigar, golden seven-pointed stars of Sunglass, and the black hammers of Wrecker. The lords of the Narrow Sea had risen for the king, and Renfred had gotten his wish. Jon smiling at that even as he hid from them all. It took him 2 days to find them, Illyrio and his guards, Duck and Aegon, Hadon and Lemore. Jon feeling the tension as they saw him ride in, and the spears of the Unsullied only lowered a little when they saw it was him. As he dismounted, he looked to see Illyrio look at him warily, while Aegon too wasn't giving him the most friendly welcomes. "I had thought you'd switched sides, Jon," Illyrio said. "I came for the truth, Magster. I feel I'm owed it," he said as the Magster shook his head. "You know the truth, Jon," Illyrio said, and Jon sighed. He watched as Illyrio nodded to two of the Unsullied and they moved towards him, Aegon looking at both the Magster and him in confusion. "Your arms, Jon, for my peace of mind," Illyrio said, and Jon nodded, undoing his sword and handing it and his dagger to the Unsullied. He moved to sit beside Aegon, but the Magister motioned to the Unsullied and he was made to sit a little away from him. Aegon again looking to the Magister with a confused look on his face. He knew it then, the boy didn't know, and as he looked around the camp, he saw it clearly. The only one who was a threat to Jacaerys was the fat cheesemonger. Should he fall then? Aegon could do nothing. He had no army, no gold, and maybe he could have a different life, a better life. "You wish to serve him, don't you, Jon, the bastard who stole my throne, who rides my dragon?" Aegon said. "It's not yours, Aegon. The throne, the dragon, it's not yours," he said as he moved his hand to the small knife on his back. "How can you say that? I'm Aegon Targaryen, the son of the dragon, the rightful king. How can you say that?" Aegon said angrily, "Jacaerys is the true king. You're nothing more than—" "I loved you, Jon, like a father," Aegon said, as Jon looked at the blade that was in his throat. Blackfry's Valyrian steel being covered in his blood. His hands fell to his side and his knife tumbled from them, Jon falling over as he gurgled and watched the blade be pulled from his throat. He reached up and tried to stem the flow of blood and then felt it as the blade pushed down against him again and again. His vision began to fade, and the boy in front of him no longer had silver hair. The mask he wore was no longer there. Gray eyes looked down on him, and raven black hair flowed in the wind as a hand was extended to him. He saw the smile, his prince's smile, now his son's smile, the king he should have served. Yaxley yes, he thought as his eyes closed. The words he'd tried to speak garbled and unintelligible. The smile on his face as he died, though, was as true as it had ever been. Arthur. The dragon laid down lies on an arc of destruction, the likes of which he'd never even imagined. He could feel the shock and horror of those beside him keenly, because he felt it too. It was magnificent and terrifying, and yet they had called it down upon themselves to break parley, to try and kill someone under a flag of truce. There were few things considered worse in their culture, and though it was said the gods would see you punished for it, Arthur could see if it was true, then they'd picked a terrible punishment for these men. He gave the order to ride, and while around him lances were readied, yet he would wield no lance. In his hands he held dawn, and woe betide any who came near his blade this day. The horses gathered speed, and he looked to see the charge they faced. Fewer men, loosely formed and panicked. They would not last long. When he reached the first of them, he swung, and dawn sang, the man's head coming from his shoulders, and to Arthur it was like swinging against the wind. 1, 2, 3, 4. Dawn cut, thrust, slashed, and each time she moved a life was snuffed out as if it were a candle. By the time they reached the camp, his white cloak was blood-spattered and Dawn's milky blade was red. What they saw once they got there was unlike anything he'd ever imagined. He'd fought men, killed men, and saw the carnage. Compared to this, it was as if each time he'd done so, it had been mere spars. "Ride them down," he shouted to men beside him as some members of the Golden Company tried to retreat. Arthur looked down the line to see Barristan swinging against foes that were beneath him, literally and figuratively, as their blades were no match for his. Jaime's golden armor glistened as he cut through men as if they were training dummies, and Arthur shook his head as he rode with his own to face even more. When there were no more men on horse to face, Arthur dismounted and began to move through the camp, the true horror of what they'd done now revealed. There was blood and shit everywhere. Men had soiled themselves both in death and life, he had no doubt. Men cried out in pain, and Arthur gave leave for some to be put out of their misery. Few came at him, their will to fight was broken, just as their bodies were in most cases. For 86 years, the Golden Company had been the fiercest force of sellswords in Essos. 3 times they'd rebelled and tried to take a Targaryen from the throne. There would not be a fourth. Prisoners. "Saw Arthur?" one of the Westerlands men said, and Arthur was too busy looking at the destruction to notice who it was. "Accept all surrenders," he said, and the man hurried off. He moved through small fires past burning tents and the bodies of men and horses. Most had met their end by dragon flame, but some had been ridden or cut down. Hearing footsteps behind him, he turned to see Lord Crakehall looking his way, the man not seeming as shocked as perhaps Arthur felt he would be. "The day is ours," Roland said. "It is," he said, his voice clearly showing his concern. "What the king did here today was good. Arthur, I know what it looks like, but I'd rather their men fell than mine. Without the dragon, we'd have lost maybe half of our army. The elephants, Arthur, did you see them? Their heads adorned with those blades. Gods, what they'd have done to our men," Roland said, shaking his head. "How bad were our losses?" he asked. "Barely any, Seared. Barely any," Roland said as he walked off. When he reached the others, he found the same looks on Jaime and Barristan's faces, and yet they both said the same thing. Arthur, looking around and thinking, was it the fire that gave him pause, and if so, why? Jacques Seares was not his grandfather. This had not been their plan, and in the end their lives were more important, were they not? As he looked to see more and more of the face, he recognized and heard the cheers as the dragon landed. He felt the concerns begin to fade away. The shock of what he'd seen was wearing off, and had this just been a normal battlefield, they'd have celebrated such a victory. To win so comprehensively at such a small cost was a cause for celebration, to be true. "Come, I'm sure the king wishes to speak to us," Jaime said, and Arthur nodded, looking to his brothers and seeing they too seemed past their own shock, and like him, bore no doubts that what Jay had done had been right and just. The God's Eye 2098 AC. Yodiat's Targaryen. That she was tired and he was too was the only thing which stopped him mounting up on Rhaenys to find the fat man and the mummer. Jaime telling him also that their plan was sound and the lords of the Narrow Sea would surely pick up any who'd tried to retreat. When he told them about the elephants, Jaime chuckled, asking him would they be eating them too, James shaking his head at the thoughts of it. I think we'll stick to meat for now, my lord. Let Rhaenys enjoy the spoils of war, he said with a smirk. We've taken 2,000 prisoners, my king. There are quite a large number of men who are injured who may recover too, though some may not. All in all, I'd say 5,000. Barristan said. What do you plan to do with them? Arthur asked. The wall, sir. They can take their vows or lose their heads. The choice is theirs, he said. And Arthur nodded. Strickland? Jaime asked. He and any of the commanders don't get a choice. I offered them terms and made them a promise. They kneel and lose their heads, he said, and saw the knights agree. It was dusk when Loras arrived back with Randall, Turley, and his cavalry, the lord both happy at their victory and upset at the fact he'd missed the battle. When he looked out at the field and saw what they'd done, Jay waited for the recriminations. Just as he'd done since he'd landed, but just like then, he received none. The lord actually giving him a respectful nod, and Jay didn't know how to take that. Was it fear or truly respect he was getting from Turley and the others? For now, he had no time to think too much on it, as Harry Strickland and the others were brought to the side of the lake. Blackballock, the man he found out, had fired the arrow at him, Franklin Flowers, Lysan Omar, and Gorys Edoren. These 5 men now the last remaining leaders of the Golden Company alive. He was about to pronounce the sentence when Gorys Edoren, the red-haired paymaster of the Golden Company, spoke up. Please, don't kill your grace. I'll give you access to our accounts. The cheesemonger paid us well. Please, your grace. The man begged, and Jay looked at him, feeling the fire in him ready to rise. How well? He asked as he allowed the ice to calm him. 3 million gold dragons in an account in the Iron Bank under my control. The man said shakily, You have access to this account, he asked. And the man nodded. Very well, you'll travel with some of my men, transfer the coin to my account, and I'll give you your life and your freedom. He said, and saw Jaime nod. What of the rest of us? Please, your grace, send us to the wall or exile. Harry Strickland said, I told you what would happen here today. You tried to kill me in a parley, and refused my offer. Actions have consequences, and as for exile, no. The Golden Company ends today, Strickland. You should face that end like a man, he said, and Harry blubbered as he was brought to the block. Jax looked around at those watching. Arthur, Barristan, Walder, Lord Bannerford, and Craighall, Randall, Tarley, and Shaymay. There were men who'd rode and bled, some who'd lost friends even in their victory, all of them looking at him as he drew his sword. These men have come to our lands to place a false king on a throne that is not his to take. They've killed good men today, men we honor now, by seeing those responsible for their deaths pay with their lives. I, James Targaryen, the third of my name, King of the Nandals. Ronar and First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. Sentence you to die, your words. It was a contract, Harry Strickland blubbered. Jay raised Dark Sister, and then swung the sword, the blade slicing through homeless Harry's neck easily. Lucian O'Mara, Franklin Flowers, and finally Blackballock, each of them dying by his hand. And once it was done, he turned to the men who'd stayed to watch each one. You men did well today. The spoils of war are yours. Tonight, celebrate the victory you helped me win. Mourn those you lost, and know your king is proud of you all, Jane said as he walked away. That night, he spent going over the plans for the next step. He'd look to the others in the morning, see how his uncles fared before deciding if he was to ride or fly to someone's aid. Or if it was on to King's Landing, he lay down and felt himself drift to sleep, the exertion of the day finally getting to him, and when he woke the next morning, he felt barely refreshed. After breaking his fast, he decided to forego the spars, instead going back to his tent and going to the birds, seeing if he could find out where he was needed, if anywhere. The more you warged into something Jay had found over the years, the more your connection with them developed. At first, he had thought it was just a ghost and Rhaenys that could share what they saw with him, show him past adventures or things they wished him to see, but over time he found that if he warged repeatedly, that those things were there in those animals too. The birds would share their thoughts with him, and the mice and rats he repeatedly warged into would do so too. With time and practice, he'd found a use for it. He found Gerion's bird in a cage, still in the tent, Jerry looking on annoyed as Gerion rode off and left it behind. The damn fool, he thought as he wondered where he'd gone, and looking into the bird, he found he was chasing Edmure, Tully. With his uncle Ned, he found him sleeping, the bird not giving him anything, and so he resolved to use the glass candles to see if he should march to join the northern camp. Tyrion he found laughing and japing, he and Satin, and Jors and young Walder, all of them sitting around laughing about the frays. It was when he got to Oberyn that he found he had to take control, chirping to let him know he was watching. "You heard it all?" he said, and the bird chirped once. "My spear is yours, nephew," he heard Oberyn say, as his uncle smiled at the bird. Jay opened his eyes and felt the pressure in his chest, the roar of Rhaenys as she felt it too. He stormed from the tent and raced to her, needing to calm her down, and knowing it had to be soon. Walder and Loras ran behind him, and by the time he reached the dragon, he felt her rage was ready to be unleashed on anyone but him. "I'll fucking burn him, and his whole country. Jane, y'all of them," she said loudly. "Oberyn is with us. Not all our blood feels as Doran does," he said as he stared into her eyes. "He is my uncle, your uncle. He'd betray us, so—" "He's betrayed us, Jane. For how long has he worked against us?" she asked. "It matters not. We'll end him. But first we need to make sure our other uncle is safe. Then we can work on Doran," he said, and she brushed up against him. Jason trying his best to calm her more even though he didn't feel it himself. Once he was sure she'd relaxed enough, he turned and headed back to the tent. Yaxley, Arthur and Barristan having joined him now. "Your Grace?" Jaime asked. "It seems not all of Doran is behind us." Doran sent his son to turn Oberyn to his side. "He's with Illyrio, and the Mummer Dragon seeks to join up with the Golden Company and work against us. Intends to stab us with a sword in our backs, I expect," he said as he looked through his chests. "What will he do now? They're defeated," Lors asked. "I don't know, but I'm about to find out," he said as he took the glass candles and the jar of blood out of the chest. "Jaya?" Jaime asked. "If he's working against me now, then what almost happened to Margaery makes more sense. I need to know if it was him and what his plans are," he said as he placed the green candle on the table and put the black one beside it. "If it was him," Lors asked, "then my sister may get her wish," he said as he poured the blood over the green candle and began to look into the past. House Redfort 2097 AC before the war began. Mitchell, she had disappeared. Just plain up and disappeared. One day she was just where she had always been, and the next, mates and her mother were gone. He found he couldn't concentrate. Each day in training he'd be beaten easily, and at his meals he barely ate. So when the letter came from Yorinda Rice of all people, Maetso gathered his things and rode quickly to the gates of the moon before making his way to the Eyrie. Traveling through stone, snow, and sky, the fact that Maya wasn't here only hit him even more deeply. No one could move across the treacherous paths. As she could, he used to jape with her that she was more steady on her feet than any of the mules she led were. When he finally reached the Eyrie itself, Maxwell felt almost scared of what he'd find. Had some harm come to her? Was she hurt? Worse? No, he'd not think like that. He couldn't. Maya, wherever she was, would be unharmed. Please gods, let her be unharmed, he thought as he was welcomed into the keep. Miranda was in her element, running the keep far better and with more grace than Lady Lysae ever had. Knowing the woman herself wasn't here was at least something he could be grateful for. The thoughts of seeing her feed her son from her teat, not something he wished to dwell on. He made his presence known to Lord Nestor and then waited for Miranda to have time to speak to him, something which took far longer than he had expected. "Michael, come with me," she said after he'd been sitting watching as her father listened to petitions for some hours. He followed her down the hall and into a small room, each step making him focus on her face to see if she seemed ready to give him upsetting news. That she appeared to be relaxed and her usual boisterous self brought him some hope that the news wasn't to be the very worst. Though why it was her that was bringing it to him still made him wonder. She and Maya had been friendly, but never true friends. "Take a seat, Michael, we've much to discuss," Miranda said, and he did as she bid. "Maya," he asked worriedly, "is safe and well, but before we speak of her, I must speak to you of Domeric." Miranda said, "Domeric?" he asked, wondering what his friend had to do with this. "You know how Domeric and I feel about one another?" she asked, and he nodded. "And you know that me being a steward's daughter, and he being his father's heir, as much as we wish it, it could never be." I know, he said sympathetically. Yet you believe your father will allow you and Madye to marry, she asked. I love her, he said, stumbling over his words. As I loved Americ and he loves me as Maya loves you. Myranda said, and despite the situation, Maya found himself smiling briefly. They'd never said it to anyone but each other, so for Myranda to know meant that Maya had confided in her. I would go against my father for her, he said, though not as firmly as he may have. As would Dom for me, Michael, but saying it is not the same as doing it, and in the end both of you would do as your father's bid, she said a little sadly. He was on the verge of protesting, but found he could not, as much as he wished to believe he would do as he said. He knew deep down that, in the end, duty would win over love. It usually did. As he looked up to Myranda, though, he could see that she seemed happy as if she knew something that he did not. Demeric met someone who promised him that he and I would wed. Someone who said that if he trusted in him, then he'd see it done. Myranda said, and Michael looked to her. Who? Jon Snow, Myranda said with a smile, and Michael looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. He was about to laugh when he saw her smile leave her face and how annoyed she was at him. How can a bastard make a lord's son marry who he wishes, he asked. The question you should be asking is how can that very same bastard do so for you and Maya? Myranda said, handing him a letter. He took it and looked at the name written on it. The writing wasn't great, as Maya didn't write too much, but he'd know her handwriting anywhere. Almost tearing open the seal, he eagerly read through the words on the paper, glad to see they too were in Maya's hand. My love, worry not about my safety. My mother and I are both well and settled. I was offered a chance at the life I wished for more than anything in the world. All I needed to do was take a leap of faith. I've taken that leap, my love. I pray to the Seven that you'll do the same. I've been told that the same man who contacted me, the same man who brought me to where I am now, will in time reach out to you. Listen to him, my love. Please, for me, for us. Listen, and I believe with all my heart if you do so, then he'll see us together and married. My heart is yours, Michael, always. My eyes. His first instinct was to cry, knowing she was safe and well and that she loved him so. His second was worry about this man who had taken her, and finally his mind went to what Myranda had said. How the hell was Jon Snow involved in this? Jon Snow, he said. How does this relate to Jon Snow? I'm not certain. Dom sent me a letter saying that Jon Snow had a plan to bring us together. Then another arrived from some man I'd never met, telling me the very same thing, though it didn't mention Snow by name. The man who brought it was the same one who brought that, she said, pointing to the letter he held in his hand. He's a bastard, he said, still not understanding how he could do anything to make his father allow him and Maya to marry. A very accomplished one, purely on gold alone. He's perhaps the man responsible for creating more wealth than any other in Westeros. As a swordsman, even you've been heard tell, he has no equal, other than the bold or Jaime Lannister. He also has the king's favor, Meshel. I don't know how he can do what Dom says, but I believe in my love. Do you believe in yours? She asked. House Redfort 2097 AC. When the banners were called, Michael, he received another couple of letters from Maya, both being boons to his soul, and then things began to unravel. Robert's rage, he'd heard it called, and when he'd heard what the king had done and what it would inevitably entail, he knew they'd soon be called to war. Maxwell found himself in complete despair. The letters had given him hope. He'd even found himself believing a bastard could perform miracles. That Jon Snow could see him married to his love, rather than who his father was starting to suggest. Yozia was a wonderful girl. She just wasn't Maikeh. He didn't find his heart stirring when he thought of her. Now knowing the Raven would no doubt be on its way from Lord Aaron, and they'd soon be fighting against the West and Jon Snow, he knew any hope he had was lost. You look upset, young man. A voice called out from the darkness, and Mexel watched as a man stepped from the shadows, his hand automatically going to his blade as he looked at the man. You have no need of that, Mexel. I bring you a message from your love. Maya? He said softly. A raven will come calling you to war, another giving you a way out. It's time to tell your father the truth of what Lord Aaron asked you to do all those years before. Tell him the true nature of the Lord and then of the man the other raven speaks of. The man said, moving back into the statues. And Maya! I bring you a king's promise, young Machel, a king who believes in love and knows it's not the death of duty but the reason for it. the man said, and then he was gone. Just as he had said, the raven arrived from Lord Arryn calling them to arms, and just as he had said, another arrived almost as quickly as it did, this one bearing an all too different message. This one bearing a message from a king. Standing in his father's solar and with his brother Jasper, sitting at the table, Maxwell ready to tell his tale. Do you remember the tourney of King's Landing, father? The one where Jon Jaehaerys Targaryen beat me, Harry, Piper, and Vance? He asked. I remember, aye, his father said, as he looked up at him, Jasper looking to him too. We were told to beat up Loras Tyrell, then to beat up Jaehaerys we were paid to do so, he said shamefully. Paid by who? Jasper asked. Lord Arryn, he said to shocked faces. Why would Lord Arryn wish a bastard beaten, or a damn rose? His father asked. He told us he'd reached too high, spoken up to his betters, and needed to be taught a painful lesson. I didn't think it was wrong at the time. He was my liege lord. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said, his head bowed. What does this have to do with anything, Mikkel? Truly, his father asked. I believe the words of Jaehaerys Targaryen more than I do, Lord Arryn's father. I think we need to wait. Call the men by all means if you must, but we shouldn't march just yet, Mitchell said. You wish me to go against my liege lord, his father said angrily. Mitchell watching as Jasper stood up from his seat and laid his hand on his father's. I think Mitchell has the right of it. For now at least, father. Jasper said, and Mitchell could have hugged his brother when his father nodded his agreement. Gates of the Moon. Now, he read the letter from Mia once more. She had heard the news they'd not risen, had found out the truth about Jon Snow, and her letter was full of love and hope, something his heart was equally full of. From the moment he'd spoken to his father, more and more news had come through. The Raven Lord Arryn shocked his father to his core. To speak that way of Lord Stark, to lie so blatantly, and yet Mikkel wondered if he'd not spoken to his father, would he have thought it a lie? Not that it mattered, he did, and then when they heard of King's Landing, of what Lord Arryn had done to Lady Lysa and her son, his father had found that unforgivable. Set the woman aside, call the boy out for being a bastard, yes, but to have them thrown into cells with no trial. It seemed Robert had picked more up from his foster father than anyone had imagined. He'd heard his father say to his brother. He got up to break his fast and walked to the room, seeing Miranda and her father there already, taking a seat beside her. Mitchell caught her smile. It was strange. Outside the Vale, a war was taking place, and people worried what it meant. Yet for him and Miranda, it was a foregone conclusion. Jaehaerys Targaryen would win, and both of them would celebrate it gratefully. Mitchell swearing once it was done, he'd pay back a debt he now owed to a king. Mirror 2090 AC, Denny. The city was on edge, and more than one magister had beseeched her, and offered her as much wealth as she desired to use her dragons on the Dothric Quay camped outside. She almost laughed in their faces. When she and Viserys had been poor and destitute, some of these very same men had refused to meet them. While they had eaten what they could in the alleys and back streets, these men had refused them an audience. Now she was a princess once more in their eyes, and not the beggars they had called her and her brother when they'd needed their help. 100,000 gold dragons, jewels, lace, carpets, spices, a ship. We'll give you a ship to take you home. They had received no reply, not from her, nor from Sheriffson. When they tried to go around her once, they saw her aunt rode on a dragon too. The men of the Company of the Rose had refused them also, Roderick telling her they'd been offered the largest contract in their history to raise arms for the city. For Dany, though, it was the words that Torrhen had said to her, which still played out in her head. For a bride. 3 simple words, and yet she knew them to be true. He'd told her as much when they'd last met. Their son would be the stallion that mounts the world. Drogo had said, and she'd be a liar if she said the idea and the man himself didn't intrigue her. Dany had no real idea of love, none truly of lust either, but she did remember feeling something in her chest while looking at the large, imposing Cal. What it was she'd find out soon enough, having arranged to meet him on the morrow. For now, though, it was someone else she needed to meet. She, Grey Worm, Missy, Belwys, and Sandor made their way through the town. Melisandre had received a vision, and they had kin here. Someone that Dany wasn't quite certain what she thought of. Not the girl herself, more who her father and uncle were, the Baratheons among those most responsible for her family's fall. When she reached the house, she took a deep breath before entering, finding a worried-looking older man, some knights, a woman who seemed lost in conversation with Melisandre, and a young girl laughing with her aunt. The girl turned when she noticed her presence, Dainty almost gasping when she saw the scarred face. She had never seen someone recover from the Grey Death. No one had to her knowledge, and yet this girl clearly wasn't a stone man. Shireen, may I present my niece, Princess Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen? Shireen said, and Shireen looked at her nervously. Your Grace, the girl said, standing up to curtsy, and Dainty looked to see the older man. Now seemed even more nervous. Please, cousin, call me Dainty, she said, and the smile the girl gave her was beaming. Not even the scars taking away from how happy she looked. Less than an hour later, she found herself sitting at the table laughing along with Shireen and Shirea. Her aunt seemed enraptured by the girl, and Dainty found her to be an absolute delight. Shireen told her more about Westeros' recent history, about her nephew, and about her family than almost anyone had. Tales of what her nephew did while pretending to be a bastard, seeming almost wondrous in how the girl told them. Is it true you have dragons, cousin? Shireen asked, excitedly. It is. Perhaps later I'll show them to you, she asked, and saw the girl nod eagerly. She readied to leave a few hours later, and as she walked from the house, the girl hugged her tightly, the older man following her outside and looking to Sandor with some recognition in his eyes. Forgive me, Princess, but Lord Stannis asked me to ensure his wife and daughter's safety. May I ask your plans for them? He asked worriedly. You may, sir. Davos your grace, Davos Herworth, the man said. I believe my aunt told you that we intend to sail and meet with my nephew. From what I gather, my nephew wishes our cousin to return with us. I am unaware why, however. I give you my word, Sir Davos. No harm will come to Shireen. We are not stags or lions. We don't harm children, she said as she moved away. Forgive me, your grace, but the king is allied with lions. Sir Davos said, a different lion, sir. By all accounts, Lord Jaime is anything but his father, she said, and the man nodded. She ate with the men of the Company of the Rose that night, Sandor and Belwas both trying to out-eat and out-drink each other. She, Missy, Jack, and Eerie sat together, and her aunt and Melisandre arrived only when the meal was nearly done. Dainty waited until her aunt had finished eating before asking to speak to her, the two of them walking outside to where the dragons were resting. She couldn't help but smile looking at them curled up and sleeping. Others may see them as ferocious beasts or incredible things to marvel at. Dainty saw them as her children. Even her aunt didn't know what that felt like, and she hoped that perhaps her nephew may, turning from the sleeping dragons to her aunt. She found Shier seemed distracted, and so, instead of what she had come to speak to her about, that became the first question. "And is something wrong?" she asked concernedly. "What? No, not really. It's just that I've not set foot in Westeros for nearly 100 years, to go back to see places I'd never thought I'd see once more. Oh, I knew I was destined to go back one day. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know if I ever truly believed it would come to pass," Shiera said. "Do you fear going back, or not wish to?" Dainty asked the second question, almost getting caught in her throat as the thoughts of having to go back without her, not one she had contemplated until now. "No. Am I nervous? Yes. But I'm excited too, Dainty. I look forward to meeting our nephew, to finding out the truth about him." Shaka said with a smile. "As do I," Dany said. "But you didn't come to speak to me about me. What's on your mind, niece?" "Drogo, the things he said, I find they intrigue me. He intrigues me." "You are attracted to him?" Shiro asked, looking at her. I think so," she said softly. "Enough to marry him and be his wife. Were it not for what we must do, then maybe I'd think of it, but we must return, and I worry he and his Khalasar may not take that news well. And so be it. We are dragons, Dainty. More so now than ever before, and a dragon is not a slave." "No, she is not," she said, smiling. Tyrion gave her 100 men to ride out with them the next day, along with her unsullied Missy, Jiki, and Iri, Sandor, Belwas. They had a large accompaniment. Compared to the Khalasar, though, they were anything but, Drogo having managed to gather almost 100,000 by some estimates. Though not all were here, Dany rode the silver filly he had gifted her, seeing the large Khal smile when he saw her. Drogo rode towards them with only his blood riders, and when he reached them, he got off his horse alone. Dainty Doim likewise. When Grey Worm helped Missy down, Dainty held her hands up to the others to stay back. Drogo then walking over to them while looking at her all the while. I've searched the great grass sea from Viat's Dothrak to Korth. When I heard you had found your child, I and my Khalasar rode hard to find you. Do you remember what I promised you? Drogo asked, and Missy interpreted. I do, she said, and waited for Missy to relay her words before Drogo spoke again. I come to you a prawl seeking a bride, I ask once again, Silverhair. Join with me, together we will see the stallion that mounts the world born, see a future that none could dare imagine. I cannot, she said softly, and saw the anger on his face rise and then fall. For a second, I will take a wooden horse and ride the poison water, for now at least. My fate is not here. Great call, one day I may return. Should you ask it of me then, perhaps my answer would be different. You would leave? He asked Missy, looking worried at how much he raised his voice. Dany holding her hand up to stop Sandor or any of the others from jumping from their horses. I must leave. If you wish to see me return, then I ask you to ride from this place. Leave it in peace. And one day, if the great stallion wishes it so, then perhaps our paths may cross once more. She said. He said nothing, and she saw his anger seem to calm. What replaced it, she wasn't sure. Was it sadness or resignation, determination, or something else? He reached out for her hand, and she allowed him to take it. Looking deep in her eyes, he smiled and leaned down to kiss her, Dany allowing him to brush his lips against hers. She felt her chest rising and her heart threatening to break free from it. It was thumping that hard. When the kiss ended, she was left breathless, and he looked at her as if he was going to throw her over his shoulder and drag her away. A part of her wishing he would do just that, while another dared him to try. When the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, when the seas go dry and the mountains blow in the wind like leaves, then you shall return and find me waiting for you, Drogo said, and Dany watched as he turned and walked away. The Magisters credited her with the Khalasar leaving and once again offered her wealth and jewels. This time, Shara telling her to take their offer and to ask for a ship too, which they gave her without hesitation. They loaded it up with the gifts they gave her, and that night she said her goodbyes to Torrhen and the Company of the Rose. The man asking Roderick and the others to accompany her on her journey and giving her a letter for her nephew. The next morning she felt excited as they set sail, Melisandre having come to her to tell her where they should head, and the idea of seeing the place of her birth almost bringing tears to her eyes. Sandor told her that Davos was a decent sailor, and so she allowed the man to pick her crew. Shireen and his son would sail with them, and she knew he'd see her safely home. The route they would go would keep them near land. The dragons may or may not be able to fly all the way, but she'd take no risks. As she stood on the deck watching Myr fade away, she felt her fingers brushing her lips, Drogo's kiss still almost being felt by her, when she closed her eyes. She heard her aunt and Missy walking up behind her. Sandor and Belwas soon joining them along with Grey Worm, Roderick, Shireen, and Melisandre. Dany reached out and took her aunt's hand in hers, a smile soon appearing on both their faces. Home, we're going home, she said softly as the dragons flew overhead. The Trident 2098 AC. Ned! Each night on the march and now here on the eve of the battle itself, Ned had found himself walking the camp with Lozier by his side. His thoughts, worries, and doubts he shared only with the wolf. To each of his lords he was resolute, unyielding, and unafraid. And yet, with the wolf, he was as he truly was. 3 times he'd rode to war, and each of them had cost him something. The first war he'd lost family, friends, and almost his honor too, given what he had tried to do with his nephew. The second he'd lost time with his family, with his children, and it had done nothing, achieved nothing in the end. Truth be told, neither of them had. The first was to see for justice, and in the end to see a better king crowned, neither of which he got. The second was to see the Greyjoys put down hard so a generation at least would know peace and not suffer from ironborn raids. Again, they'd failed. This one was to crown a new king, a new hope for the realm, and though he knew that Jaime was that, a part of him worried still. Would it really be the end of war in his lifetime, or was it just another false dawn? And one day he'd need to march once more. He was standing looking out over the camp, the flattened ground not really allowing for him to see anything but the torches that were lit. You seem troubled, Ned, he heard a voice, and looked to see Leah was not worried in the least, though Howland was someone he was glad to speak to. I wonder if this will be the last of them, the end of wars in my lifetime, he said. And Howland said nothing for a few moments. We've not truly known peace in our lives, Ned. That's not our role to play. Howland said, What is our role? He asked. That when we leave this world, those that come after us will. Howland said as he walked away. He headed back to his tent a little while later. The night was long ahead of him, and while some men drank or others rested, Ned wasn't sure he would be able for either. Sitting in his tent, he looked to the bird and chuckled. Jade had asked him to speak to it, talk to it, tell it his plans. He could not. True, he knew some of what his nephew was capable of. But the first time he'd tried it, the Great John had walked in and thought him mad. Are you bloody talking to that bird? Ned? The Great John had asked, and Ned found after that he couldn't do so anymore. He closed his eyes and lay down and had been asleep for barely a moment, when he felt Leia grab his hand and then he heard the commotion outside. Jumping up, he grabbed his sword and feared they were under attack, though he wondered why Leia hadn't warned him sooner. Rushing from the tent, he found Sara Wylis moving towards him along with Lady Meg, neither of them looking concerned. Wylis, Maggie? He asked. It seems our friends from the west have caught up with us, Ned. Prince Tyrion and his men are camped just a few miles down the road, Meg said. Tyrion is here? He asked. Aye, he and his lords have arrived, West said, and they made their way to the edge of the camp, where Tyrion, 2 Kingsguard, some lords and knights were riding in. My prince, Ned said with a small bow. Lord Stark, may I present Lords Broom, Westerling, Serret, and Lefford, and Serlau Craighall. My Kingsguard, Sarah Richard Horp, and Sarah Jorce Whitwolf. Tyrion said, Ned, noticing the smiles at the mention of the last man's name. It's good to see you, my prince. My lords. Good Serace. Come, I'm sure you'd welcome an ale and some refreshments, he said, and Tyrion was quickly helped from the horse and walked beside him. The Kingsguard by either shoulder as Serace and Lady Mage walked with the lords. They were taken to a tent where soon they were joined by more of his own lords, all of them standing by the table looking down on the map of the lands they were on. My army is behind me. Lord Stark, 3,000 horse and 8,500 men ready for battle. Lygaron too will be ready on the morrow, he said to smiling faces. You intend to use your dragon? The Great John asked. I intend this to win, Lord Umber. I don't wish a field of fire, but my nephew wished the dragons to be the hammer, and the armies the anvil on which to break our enemies against. The Vale Lords rely most heavily on their knights and lances. The North and even my own cavalry are dwarfed by their own. Forgive the poor choice of words, Tyrion said to laughs. We have caltrops and large spears to dissuade and break a charge, and my own men's phalanx will repel any who make it through, my prince. Lord Demeric said. Better than a dragon, Tyrion said to laughs. I've no doubt we'd hold them back, Lord Bolton, but we'd lose many men in doing so, and our king would rather the losses be theirs than ours. Ned looked around the room to see the appreciative nods from the men around him, Meg smiling as she looked to him. We will use the dragon tactically, my lords, to its greatest effect, but not to its full power, Tyrion said. Our scouts say Riverrun has fallen, my prince. Lord Edmure and his men are nowhere to be seen. Can we expect support from your uncle's army? Sir Wylis asked. Where Edmure is? Geryon will be close behind. I'd wager my uncle crossed here, Tyrion said, pointing to the Ruby Ford. If I'm right, then our friends from the Vale will soon have a lion at their backs. They spoke for a few more minutes, his lords leaving the tent even more confident than they had been when they'd spoken of their own battle plans earlier. Tyrion's arrival with extra forces gave them the edge, with a dragon the advantage. After the others had left, Tyrion motioned to Sir Richard and Sarian Jorah to leave them alone, the small man seeming to almost breathe out in relief once they were. Ned smiled warmly at him and laughed openly when Leia walked over and licked his face. I blame our nephew. Ever since he arrived at the Rock, I've been licked by wolves far too often, Tyrion said, with a chuckle. Apparently I'm Pack. I, that you are my prince. It's a good plan you came up with, the hammer and the anvil, he said. That's on our nephew. I just hope to carry it out, right? Tyrion said. Any word from Jay? He asked. No, I've no worries, though, Lord Stark. Lozier would let you know. Lozier and me, our nephew is safe and well. We should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll get none. Ned said, and Tyrion nodded. Good fortune, Ned, Tyrion said, using his name for the first time. Aye, you too, Tyrion. If the gods will it, then we'll be victorious and see our nephew soon. The Trident 29-8 AC. Yen Yen Rice. The words wouldn't leave his head. Nephew. He had called him nephew. Not son, not bastard. Nephew. Yes, he had been angry. Furious even. But was that a slip of the tongue, or had he actually been so rattled that he'd spoken the truth? The letter he had sent, the things he had said about Ned Stark when he really gave them thought, they made no sense. Jackson hadn't been as close to Ned as Lord Jon or Robert, but he had seen how the Northern Lord had reacted to Robert's behavior. Friends, they may have been, but they were not kindred spirits. As for questioning his honor, on that, he was torn as he'd always considered Ned to be a paragon of it. So much so that he'd enjoyed the man's company the few times he'd met him since he'd gone back north. He'd even stopped off to visit him when Waymar took the Black, finding him no lesser than he had thought of him before. Now though it was clear he'd acted somewhat dishonorably, be it in hiding his nephew, though on that he couldn't place too much blame, or now going against his king, yet there was honor in that too, family bonds, and given what Robert had turned into, perhaps it made Ned's choices more honorable than his own. What Jon couldn't get right, though, was the idea of the Ned Stark that Jon had portrayed. It didn't fit with the evidence, and this slip of the tongue made the possibility of a lie being perpetrated on them all ever more likely. The closer it drew to the battle, the more this preyed on his mind, so much so that he walked from his tent to speak to Lord Jon about it, finding the man restless and disturbed in his own tent. After he had asked to speak to him alone, Lord Jon sent his guards away, Jon taking the offered seat. "Lord Jon, I find myself most troubled," he said, and Jon looked to him. "About the battle, we'll win it, Jan. The king and Lord Stannis will arrive to join up with us. Maybe during the battle itself, even if it's only later, it'll matter not. We're the Knights of the Vale, and no northern army can withstand our charge." "What Lord Stark said, Jon," he said. "Lies, by the seven, I swear. They're lies. He's trying to rattle us, Jan. We have the Stormlands. The Golden Company rides with Robert. Also, they are outmatched, not us, so they tried to divide us with lies," Jon said, looking at him. "So the boy is not a Targaryen. He's truly Stark's bastard?" he asked. "Aye, for true, I covered it up, Jan. Let him keep his honor, though it pains me to see what he's become." "Yet you called him his nephew?" he asked. "What?" "You called him his nephew, told Lord Stark that his nephew would lose his head." Jon said and watched the small gulp that Jon Arryn took before speaking. "A mistake? A slip of the tongue? I was so shocked that Ned would forsake his honor so," Jon said. "Of course. Forgive me, my lord," he said, and Jon smiled at him, though he looked relieved too. "Of course, Jon. It's a battle. We're all on edge." He left the tent anything but. He wasn't on edge. Though it was clear that Jon Arryn was. He'd lied to him, to his face. Jon had seen it, and as he walked to meet with some of the other lords, he heard some cheers and instead found himself with Lord Jon and the rest, looking on as the remainder of the Riverlands army arrived. "Lord Jon, I bring my men to join with your own," Edmure Tully said as if he bringing them some grand prize. Jon looking over, and seeing who was missing more so than who he'd brought with him. "Good men and true, Lord Mallister. Bracken and Blackwood. Darry. Men he may not always have agreed with, but none he questioned the honor of." Looking at Edmure Tully and remembering how he'd behaved in King's Landing, he was not someone he could say the same about. That his bannermen had abandoned him was bad enough. That they'd joined a Targaryen was a sign of just how far the Tullys had fallen. He walked through the camp and made it to where Ender was sparring, calling his son to come to him. "I wish you to speak to our men. Tell them to ready to march. Then ask Benedar, Gilwood, and Sarasimon to come to my tent. Do so quickly and quietly. Andar." "Father, do it now, son." As Andar ran off to do as he said, Yatso called Sam over to him and gave him his orders. His master of arms hurrying to do as he bid. He walked back to his tent and sat down and poured himself a glass of wine which he drank down quickly, before pouring himself another. When Andar arrived with the lords, he was on his third, though this one he sipped and he asked his son to stay and listen as he talked to them. Each of them looking on, shocked as he told them what he believed and what his intentions were. "You're asking us to abandon our liege lord, Yosiana," Benedar said. "Aye, this isn't honorable," Simon added. "Honor left this place a long time ago. A king without honor, and now a liege lord who lies as if it's second nature. I hold no love for the dragons. I was happy to see them fall. Aerys was mad, and the realm needed him gone, but I knew then that there were plans to replace him and their family. After what happened with Kyle, I welcomed it even more. I fear what the dragon will do shall he win. Truly, I do. but I'll accept my punishment like a man. I'll not doom my house for a lie." Jord said, looking at the others. "You would leave us to fight alone," Gilwood said. Rhaegar looked at the lords. He held maybe a fifth of the Vale Knights, Lord Gilwood, Hunter, a little less than that. The same for Sir Seaman Templeton and Lord Benedar Belmont. Between them, a little over a third of the army would ride if they joined him. The other lords who he didn't trust not to run to Lord Jon may do so. Also, if he could bring these on board, maybe there'd be no need for a battle here today. A council and trials could suffice. "I say we take our chances elsewhere, my lords. I ride. I hope you join me," he said, and looking at their faces, he doubted they would. As he rode out that night, they cursed him. Lord Jon threatening his house and the other lords looking down on him, and yet he felt no shame or dishonor in what he was doing. It was midday the next day when he met the army which marched towards him, riding out to see almost 8,000 men on horses standing in his way. He looked and saw lion banners, blackwood, bracken, houses of the west, and above them all the three-headed dragon flying resplendently in the air. "Lord Royce, are we to give battle today?" Jaime Lannister said as they rode out to parley. "No, my lord. On that you have my oath." House Royce stands down and will play no part in this war. "When your king takes his throne, I'll present myself for his judgment. It was my choice to ride, my fault, and blame to bear," Yacht said. "Did you spill blood, my lord?" Jarian asked. "No. Then you'll find his grace a far more forgiving king than you may imagine. Good fortune to you, Lord Royce. When next we meet, I'll stand for you." Jairo said, and Jon looked at him and nodded. The two armies almost went out of their way not to slow each other's march, and Jon sighed when the last of them had made their way through. "Should we not warn them, father?" Ander asked. "The war is over, Ander. We've picked our side," he said as he rode on. The crossroads and the road to the Aerie soon coming into view. The Battle of the Trident 29-8 AC. The Great Jon. God's nothing got his blood going, as much as this, standing side by side with men from his house, looking to see men and women from the north ready to do battle against southern twats. Meiji and Jory stood with their maces ready, and with the men of Bear Island, Jorah on a horse, while his aunt and cousin just like him preferred to be in the thick of thing. Oh, he liked to ride into battle also. But there'd be no need for a horse out there today. They were the anvil, and they'd see the veil was broken on northern steel. The Great Jon looked to see his son, the pride on his face, as he watched him gee up. The man was something only a father would recognize. "We are Northmen, and today we fight for our king, the first true northern king since Torrhen Stark. The king from the north." The small Jon shouted. "The king from the north." The chants went up as they looked out on the open field. He looked on as the lords of the west and the northern cavalries made it look as if they were waiting for the charge, and then he heard the thunder of the banging of weapons against shields. His own great swords hilt the loudest of them all as the northern army began to scream and shout. "They think them savages. Well, let them hear a savage call," he thought as he bellowed, umber louder than any. As it began to quieten down, he saw the charge as the knights of the Vale came towards them. The pikes and spears they had by their feet were lifted in case any made it through. The field going eerily quiet, and then the howling came. Louder than two wolves had any right to. Lya and Greywind howled, and the Great Jon felt himself shiver listening to the sound, though the one which came next was even louder. Lyakron flew over their heads, the dragon roaring as he did so, and as he looked out on the field, he felt sorry for the men who'd have to face the fire, though he cheered all the same when the dragon's flames came from its mouth. "Ready yourselves," he shouted as he heard their own cavalry charge. The horses which made their way to them were scattered, and the charge itself had lost most of its momentum, some heading straight into the pikes they held, while others abandoned their horses and came at them on foot. "Where are we from?" he shouted. "The north." The shouts went up around him. "Show them," he shouted, as they moved towards the men who had been unlucky enough to make it to them. His sword swung and cut through the man as if he wasn't there. His shield crashed against another, knocking him to the ground. Turning, he found a horse racing at him. The lance in the man's hand aimed right at his head, and he laughed, ready to take him on, when a gray blur took the horse down. "He was mine, you fucking greedy wolf," he said when Lya raced by him, the growling of this wolf, at least, better than the silence of the white one. He moved further into the field. Ahead of him, the flames were still falling down on unfortunate souls. Small Jon was fighting 2 men at once, and he moved to help, only to see his son take both of them down, turning back just in time to block a shot from a knight wielding a morning star. The slice of his sword which took the man's arm was instinctive, and he stabbed down to end him, only to hear a laugh from his side. "You're lucky it wasn't me or one of my girls, Jon. Otherwise you'd have been fucked," Magid said, and he chuckled, shaking his head when she pointed to Small Jon and Jory fighting and beating 2 more knights. "Who's next to face Goatsbane?" he heard his son shout. "That boy is your fucking son, all right," Neji said as she turned and moved to face a knight of her own. Jon laughed loudly as he looked around for someone else to fight. Around him, Northmen were killing Southerners, and it was fucking glorious to see. Tyrion. He waited at the back of the army, sitting on his dragon's back. Sarah Richard and Sarah Jorahs both annoyed they couldn't come with him, but Tyrion wasn't Jay, he wasn't comfortable with passengers just yet. It was strange for him, he'd not given much thought to someone riding on Rhaegar with him, and now he could only picture one person he'd like to have by his side. Thinking of Ariane filled him with resolve he'd not had until now. The knowledge that once this war was done, they'd be wed, filling his heart with joy. He closed his eyes and saw her face, and felt Legeron's eagerness to fly beneath him. "Salvagon, Legeron, Flygaron," he said, and the dragon took to the air. Tyrion imagined what the dragon would look like to those below, the sun reflecting off its bronze scales and the tiny figure in black armor on its back. When the Northmen cheered, Legeron roared, a wolf's howl joining it as they flew towards their enemies. He could see the Knights of the Vale in the midst of their charge. To some it would look majestic, but soon he'd show them what true majesty looked like. "Dracois," he said, and Legeron's flames landed just in front of them. The horses and riders did their best to pull up before they rode into them, some managing it better than others. He flew past, and Legeron turned around, flying over to the ones who were away from their first pass. "Dracarys," he said, and the dragon's flames did exactly the same, these riders seeming luckier than the others. 4 times he made passes, the flames getting ever closer each time. The charge finally broke, and some men turned to retreat, readying themselves to fight another day. Connier, Re Arneptre Zir Se Legeron. "There, those show them Legeron," he said, and the dragon flew to the largest group. "Dracarys," he said, and Legeron's flames fell. The arc he drew around them was beautiful, he thought. A wall of flame, and the knights looked up, Tyrion watching as the one in the lead dismounted and knelt. He was right to. He'd not be the last man today who'd find himself kneeling before a dragon. Tyrion flew over the northern army, finding them engaged in running battles, but they had the numbers and the Vale crashed against the anvil everywhere he looked. It left only the reserves for him to deal with, and so he took the dragon toward them. Legeron was not tired and instead was eager for more. The flames he laid down cut off a retreat, though it was soon clear some had already done so. Allowing the dragon one more pass, he was happy to see the army boxed in. A loud roar as he flew over, had some more men quickly ready to surrender. He looked out to the battlefield once more, a field of fire it wasn't, and he felt proud of that, proud of his dragon as he flew now to find those who'd retreated. "Thank you, Legeron," he said, and the dragon roared its happiness at Tyrion's pride. The battle he came upon was almost at the crossroads itself. Legeron flying over to see the lion and dragon banners flying high. His uncle had made it, and his cavalry was tearing into the retreating forces. Tyrion had Legeron lay down some flames to let them know he was here too, and watched as that fight soon came to an end. He couldn't see his uncle below, and he thought about landing to find him, but the arrows that flew towards Legeron angered the dragon too much. The group of men hid among some broken rocks as if that would save them, and Tyrion could feel his dragon's anger that they'd try to kill him. "Dracarys," he said, and the flame which came from Legeron was the warmest and brightest it had ever been. Anyone below them was dead, he knew, and while he felt some guilt, he also knew that had they tried the same with soldiers or riders, their fate would be no different. He turned to look at his uncle's forces once more. The battle was clearly over, and yet he couldn't see Jaron anywhere. For now, he could do nothing, though, and so he flew back to the Trident, though he was sure he wasn't really needed there either. Jon Arryn. Traitors. He had been surrounded by traitors. Though the other lords didn't follow Yoon from his camp, they hadn't told him of the lord's plans. So Jon had to look on in shame as a lord of his rode away from the battle rather than towards it. Aedmure mumbled something about seeing him and the other lords pay once they had won, and Jon paid lip service to the idea. Though each moment it drew closer to the battle itself, he felt it less and less likely they'd take the day. Aedmure's pitiful force was not a match for usse, and though he'd first thought it a boon, he was beginning to think it anything but that his good brother had made his way here. When he had spoken about Lysa, Jon was forced to lie once again, talking to the man alone in his tent to keep him on his side. That they'd pushed him to this was yet another reason he hated the bastard and his savage uncle, and he swore he'd see one or both of them dead if he could. Looking to his men as they lined up and to the forces that were arrayed against him, even Murin's loss didn't seem as bad as he feared, and Jon began to feel hope once more. The North's cavalry had been joined by some Westermen, but they were badly formed. The North's strength lay in its infantry, and his knights would cut through them. If he won here today, and could join up with Robert, they could end this rebellion, see the dragon, wolf, and lions fall. The roses too, and the vengeance he'd lay down upon them would be terrible. The North would swear to the true gods and the gold of Casterly Rock. The Reach would fill their coffers. Jon smiled as he rode down the line of his knights, his righteous fury ready to be unleashed. Our king is called, and we've answered, like the leal and honor-bound men we are. Out there are men with no honor, savages, who worship heathen gods, who seek to replace our good and true king with a mummer's dragon. We've suffered under the yoke of a mad dragon once before. We'll not suffer a false one. For the king, for House Arryn, for the Vale, he shouted, and watched as his knights charged. They have no cavalry, Aedmure said, riding with him, his own men ready to mop up those who didn't fall in a second charge. Though, truth be told, Jon didn't trust him not to fuck up his perfect cavalry charge. Aye, we'll see them. The roar was unlike anything he'd ever heard, his head almost spinning as he searched for the source of it, Aedmure pointing to the sky and speaking nonsense to him. What do you mean a dragon? He said, panicked as he finally saw it. It was almost beautiful, the sun reflecting off scales that looked like fire itself, its wings barely moving as it covered the ground, and then the true horror of the situation he was in revealed itself. The flames hit the ground, and he could barely look, instead finding himself staring at the figure on its back, a small childlike figure wearing black armor. That wasn't Jon Snow. Jaehaerys Targaryen. That wasn't him. And if not, then who was it? If this person had a dragon, did that also mean that Jaehaerys had one too? He missed, he heard Aedmure say, and Jon looked to see the dragon lay down more flames. No, he didn't, he said, as he saw it clearly. The dragon doing its dastardly work, and below it his army crumbling as if it was nothing. Ride, take your men and ride, meet up with Robert, go, now, go, he shouted. And Aedmure didn't need a second order to retreat or put up any fight whatsoever. Jon looked as the dragon flew again and again, as it then headed towards them, his men behind him, panicking as he almost sagged in his horse. What have I done? He thought, as the dragon flew over him and he looked out to see the wolves heading his way. What have I done? Jaxlyn Waters. He stabbed down with his sword and moved forward, the Northman beside him making sure his back was clear. Ahead of him, fire rained down, and the cavalry charge he had feared facing was soon broke up. Moving with the rest of the men he'd come to call friends, Jaxlyn soon found himself in a far more serious fight. His sword was quick, though, and the armor he wore offered good protection. When his mother had heard he wished to march for the king, she had tried to get him to stay, begged and pleaded with him. But their life, the life they now had, they owed to Jon no Jaehaerys, Targaryen, and to Margaery Tyrell. He had sworn he'd pay them back somehow for all they did for him. They had their own home in Wintertown now, he had a future, and soon he was to have a wife. For it wasn't only the idea of a better life in terms of food and shelter he'd found when they'd arrived in the North. Being a bastard too was less a drawback than it had once been. Because of Jon Snow, Marla and her father didn't care about his birth, only that he could one day take over the inn that he worked at. He felt the push beside him and looked at Tom too and Jax. Stop bloody thinking about the girl. There's a fucking war to be won. Tom too said, his friend laughing as they fought their way through more men. He heard it then, the wolf's growl, and he broke from the men to head towards the sound, finding the wolf standing guard over a fallen horse. The man was some distance from it, but was clearly the worst for the fall. Moving slowly toward him, the large wolf growled at him some more, and he began to speak as softly as he could. I'm a friend, here to help. I swear it on the old gods and the new. he said, and the wolf snarled, but seemed to let him pass. He saw then who it was the wolf was guarding, and he could see the dazed look in the young man's blue eyes. Lord Robb, my name is Jocelyn. Come lean on me and we'll get you out of here, he said, and the Lord looked at him, barely seeing him before he seemed to focus, and nodded. The cowards killed my fucking horse, Lord Robb said, and Jocelyn heard the angry growl of the wolf, turning to see 3 men coming towards them. He was sorry when Robb stumbled hard to the ground, but he drew his sword, and as the wolf took 2 men down, Jocelyn fought the other, quickly finding out he was less skilled than the other man was. The wolf's growling gave him his chance, and as the man looked behind to see where he was, he struck, the sword finding purchase and the man falling, the sound of more men running his way making him fear that today was to be his last, though he welcomed these men upon seeing their colors. Help me, Lord Robb is here, he said, and they managed to get the Lord from the field. Jocelyn, looking around to see the battle was won. What's your name, lad? Your full name? Lord Robb asked. Jocelyn Waters, my lord. I owe you for what you did, ask it of me, and if I can see it done, I will. Can you introduce me to your brother? He said as they reached the camp. Ben? Robb asked, confused. The king. Why? Robb asked suspiciously. I'd like to thank him for what he did for me, he said, and Robb smiled. Aye, lad, I'll introduce you to Jon. Nod. The fight turned their way quickly, the dragon breaking the charge, and for a brief moment, he felt that he'd get through this day without having to bloody his blade. Soon, though, it was clear he would not, and the man facing him may have him beat. Sire Lyn Corbray was well known to him. He'd killed Prince Lumen Martell on the Trident, though in truth he'd really not. The Kingsguard was injured, and mortally so, before their duel began. He had also grabbed the sword he now held in his hand from his injured father, ending up being given it for true on his father's death. Ned trying not to think too much on the last time he'd fought a man wielding an incredible blade and hoping he'd not need Howland's help this day. My lady's never tasted wolf, Lyn said, and Ned smirked. Nor will she today. Shall we, Lord Stark? Aye, we may as well, he said, taking up his stance. He heard the yak growl from behind him and he shook his head, sending the wolf to help others, while this fight he'd take care of himself. The Valyrian steel of Lady Forlorn clashed against his castle forged. Behind him on his horse, ice rested, and he heard the footsteps of his guards and lords as they made their way to the fight. Waving off Sir Wylis and Lord Demeric, and noticing Meg Yake making her way to him also. Secure in the knowledge that this man wasn't taking another sword that didn't truly belong to him, Ned began to move. While no true swordsman he could hold his own, and he had one advantage over the cocky knight he faced. Ned had seen Corbray fight, while he had never seen Ned fight. So he began to favor one side, show himself weak where he was actually strong, and just as he expected, the man had seen blood and moved to it. The swords clashed and Ned moved back and back, his tiredness in act and his parries barely working as he huffed and breathed deeply. Lyn became ever cockier, Ned waiting until he moved in close before he hit him with his head as hard as he could. He felt the teeth give and the nose certainly broke, and as the man stumbled away from him, Ned thrust his sword. The gurgling sound as it went through Corbray's throat, one which he knew meant the end. The Ned, he heard a cheer, and looked to see Donal and Torgon Flint along with Hugo Wull leading. He cheers, "Come, my lords, we have a war to win," he said, picking up Lady Forlorn. Another sword for him to give back to its house, though this man he was, at least happy, was dead, and unlike the other, he'd stay so. They moved through the field and the battle was clearly already won, Ned finding the loss of life not as great as he'd imagined. I thought there'd be more, he said, and Nacha laughed. Fucking southern knights, you'd swear they'd seen a dragon or something, she said, and around him the laughs grew louder. When he reached the other side, he found more Vale men dead, though a lot it seemed had surrendered, and he looked to see Jon Arryn was one of them. His former foster father looked tired and broken as Jory held him with her mace ready just in case. Moving closer to the Lord, he felt his anger rise, and then she was beside him, calming him down, his fingers resting in her fur as he looked at Jon Arryn and the other lords of the Vale. Lyniel Corbray staring at the sword in his hand. I'll accept your surrender now, he said to Cheers. Sarah's the Northman behind him. Fuck you, Ned, Jon Arryn said, and moving faster than he thought possible. The Lord was on his feet, the silver shine from the knife in his hand showing his intent. But while Jon Arryn may have put all his speed in the move, he wasn't a wolf. Rhaegar was a blur, and the scream from the man as he lost his hand was as loud as the growl Ly gave when he fell to the ground. "See, that's bandage that is the king's to deal with," he spat as he looked to the bloodied stump that had been his foster father's arm. "I'm sorry, Lord Stark," he surrendered. He begged mercy. Jari said apologetically. "As high as fucking honor indeed," he said, patting her on the back to let her know she shared no blame. "Make sure he lives. I want to see my nephew take his head. See him die the old way. Aye, come, we've won a victory here today. It's time to get really fucking drunk." But Great Jon said, "Who's willing to wager against Goatsbane?" he heard Small John say, and he liked the others laughed as they walked away. Nod looking up to see the dragon flying over them and heading back to their camp, smiling and hoping he'd see his nephew soon. Cregan. They had ridden hard from River Run, and though he had been silent and seemed relatively well, he could tell that Jurian was anything but. Seeing how he'd acted in the Solar had shaken him. Cregan had never seen Jurian like that before. Not even in Highgarden Overjoy had he seemed to lose it so much. Now, as they camped, he found he could wait no longer. So once everyone else had gone to their tents, he went to Jurian's. He found him sitting silently, a glass of wine in his hand. Jurian seemed to be staring at something in the distance, as if he was there but not there, and when Cregan coughed, he didn't even seem to notice, Cregan calling for Dusk, whose appearance at least broke whatever spell the older man had been under. The smile, though, which appeared on Jurian's face was as sad a one as he'd ever seen. Cregan, seeing him look from the wolf to him. "Sit down," Jurian said, and he did as he was bid. "I'll tell you a tale, but it remains between us, you and me, Cregan, not your mother, and never Joy, not even Jay, you hear me." "I hear you, I swear I'll never speak a word of it," he said, and watched as Jurian drained the wine glass. "My brother was an evil man. Oh, he did some good things, but at his heart, he was an evil man. I've no doubt of that now. Do you know the thing about evil men thought, the damnable truth about each and every one of them?" Jurian asked. "No. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Think about that if you will. Every evil man you've ever heard of, Aerys, Robert, Jon Arryn, Tywin, fucking Lannister, all only thrived because good men stood by." Jurian spat. "And you did nothing?" he asked. "Ha." Jurian replied. The laugh, though, was without humor. "If only I could say that in my defense. No worse than that. My failing is I wasn't a good man, but I did nothing." Jurian said, "What happened, my lord?" "I was a Lannister through and through, cocky, entitled, arrogant, and gods did I love being so. I met a girl, a beautiful, sweet, caring girl, a girl who fell in love with me, and her, I suppose, though you'd never have guessed it from what I did. She became pregnant, and then Joy was born. I figured gold and brief attention was enough, nothing too time-consuming. I had a life to live, after all." Jurian said, and looked off into the distance once more, for some time saying nothing. "My lord? My brother didn't like that I'd brought a bastard into this world, but that was forgivable. What he really hated was that I'd done so with Bryony. She was a commoner, you see, not noble and not worthy in my brother's eyes. So he made her an offer, one she had no choice but to accept, and he made me one too, which I was glad of. Bryony had to leave the West, never to return, and Joy would be raised at the Rock and given a better life." "You accepted?" he asked. I could go on being a Lannister, you see, caring about nothing or no one." "Where did she go, my lord?" "Back to her people. Her village. She was from a small village in the Riverlands, Tully's lands. She went, and I never gave her a second thought. At the time, anyway. Not until I heard what happened to her that was... My lord, some bandits threatened the village. Raided, raped. People couldn't go out in the streets for fear of worry they'd be next. Not Bryony, though. She held no fear. Not for herself, anyway." Jurian said, looking to the ground. "She went to the Tullys, spoke to the liege's lord himself, and begged for their assistance, asked them to do their duty. Fucking fishes." Jurian said, his expression angry and yet brief as he sighed and looked to him. "They didn't?" he asked. "Hoster sent Edmure, who rather than ride to the village and help his people, help her, spent his time in taverns and brothels. When the bandits came back, they came looking for her. They found her. Jurian shook his head. Cregan watched him and sat silently. He didn't have the words or know anything he could do to comfort the man. He wasn't sure anyone could. Eventually, Hoster sent the right people, and the bandits were rooted out. They covered it up, and was it not for me looking for her, well, Geryon sighed. That's why you hate the Tullys, Kragan asked. One day, I'll have to sit down with Joy and tell her what happened to her mother. Tell her what I did, and accept she'll never look at me the same after that. On that day, I'll finally pay for my part in it. Before then, I'll see the fucking Tullys play theirs, Geryon said. Kragan got up and walked over and placed his hand on Geryon's shoulder. He still didn't have the words, but he at least knew something to say. Tomorrow we'll go fishing, my lord, he said, and Geryon chuckled, though not fully. Aye, go get some rest. Geryon said, and he did as he was bid. Edmure, a dragon, an actual dragon. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, his mind not allowing him to believe it. Looking at the flames, he knew they were done for, though briefly. He thought that maybe they couldn't control it when the flames didn't hit any of the soldiers, though Lord Jern seemed to think that was part of the plan. When he told him to gather his forces and ride, Edmure needed no second order. He rode and rode hard. Where he was riding to, he had no idea. A dragon not something he could outrun, and certainly not something they could beat. Still, he and his lords rode and soon were away from the battle, though it seemed they'd ridden into a different one. Looking ahead, he saw the sigils and felt his anger rise. His lords, these were his lords, his bannermen, and instead of riding by his side, they were riding towards him. We need to surrender, my lord, Mark said. Aye, a dragon behind us and lions ahead. The war is done. Carl added, I'll not surrender, I'll go down fighting. He launched a charge, and it was only halfway there that he realized not all of the others had followed him. It was too late to do anything else, so they rode into the much larger army, his sword thrashing out in every direction. He wasn't even sure he hit anything, he just kept riding until his horse went out from under him. Edmure rolled across the ground hard. The wind knocked out of him, and when he managed to stagger to his feet, he could see it was done. He couldn't see any of his men near him, and only that he couldn't an enemy close by either gave him comfort. Crawling along the ground, he found a small rock and lay down behind it, looking back to see the fighting coming to an end, and then he felt the shadow as the dragon flew over him once more. Closing his eyes, he opened them to find he'd not been covered in flames as he had expected. Edmure stumbled to his feet and ran, the small stream leading him to the Ruby Ford, and he couldn't see anyone chasing after him. He heard it then, the thumping on the ground, and he ran as fast as he could away from it. Whoever was riding the horse wouldn't catch him. He'd not let them catch him. Though as he stumbled and fell down the hill, he found it wasn't a horse that was chasing him at all. Get away from me! Get away from me! He shouted. His voice near breaking, such was his fear as stood up in the water he'd rolled into. The wolf didn't listen and just walked after him. Edmure trying to run through the water, but slipping over wet stones and falling under the water again and again. He heard the thumping once again, and this time he was certain it was actually horses, as he looked to see the wolf just prowling the banks of the riverbank, as if it was stalking some prey. Look, a fish in water! Jaime Lannister, said laughing, as he jumped from his horse. Edmure looking to see some men and a young boy who looked familiar to him with the Lannister lord, though he was sure he'd not met the lad. I yield, I surrender, he said, throwing his sword into the water. Did anyone hear anything? He heard Geryon say. No, my lord, the men said from behind him. I've yielded. I surrender, he said, his voice panicking. No one here fucking cares, Tully. Geryon said, walking into the water, the punch he threw at him, knocking out a tooth and taking him to his knees. No one is listening. He felt the next punch take the rest of the wind from him, and as he tried to deeply breathe in some much-needed air, he felt his lungs fill with water. Looking up, he saw Jaime Lannister hold him down. The man looked faded and blurry to him, and it took him a moment to realize that was because he'd been looking at him from under the water itself. He was pulled back up, and he began to cough and splutter. You tried to kill a boy who's worth 1,000 of you fucking fishes, a boy who I love like mine own son. Edmure felt himself pushed back down into the water and felt his breath go from his again before he was once again pulled back up, coughing and spluttering. A boy who made me realize just how precious my daughter was. A boy who loved her like she was his own flesh and blood, and you tried to take him from her. The water filled his nose and mouth, and once again he couldn't breathe. The world starting to spin. Just like you took her mother from her, fuck you, Tully. Fuck you and your entire fucking house. Family. Duty. Honor. That boy knows more of all of them than you ever did. For my daughter. For Jay and for Bryony. Damn you to the seven hells. The world started to go black as he felt his heart begin to slow. his life fading as he thought about what had brought him here. Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, he tangled with a dragon and lost, and now he was paying for his crimes. Bryony, though, who was Bryony, he thought, as the last glimmer of light faded and he left the world behind. The God's Eye, Richard Lonmouth. He arrived to find that the Golden Company had been defeated and Robert was dead. Were they the only things that had happened then? He'd have been overjoyed. Instead, though, he found that Jay was in the middle of using the glass candles, and the defeat of the army they'd face only told some of the story, so he quickly made his way to the king's tent to find Sarah Walder and Brienne outside and inside Jaime. Arthur Barristan and Loras, all looking as Jay concentrated on the candles in front of him. It seemed to take an age for anything to come up on the candles, and when it did, he was sure he wasn't the only one in the tent who gasped at what they saw. Doran Martell sitting face to face with Sir Gerald Dane, telling him to kill Margaery and offering up his daughter as the prize. That he then confirmed he'd not actually let the man live to see his wedding night through was the only part that he'd have believed had he not seen it himself. Richard, like the others in the room, stared at Jay, each of them worried he'd let his anger loose, and yet the king sat watching it all with a look he couldn't place in his eye. When Jay blinked, the image was gone, and then they began to appear rapidly, almost like a set of them, stopping, then starting over and over. Conversations Doran was having with people, yet nothing was being added to what they already knew. He could see the king get frustrated as the images changed once more. This one much different than any and even further back in time. My brother is the true snake you should fear, Rhaegar. Oberyn blows hot and cold. His anger is furious but true. And while he's a viper is easy to predict. He'll rant and rave, and once he's been spoken to and claimed, he'll listen to reason. Doran, he'll smile and sit in his way and tell you to your face. He bears you no ill will. Evlia said, "But it'll be a lie?" Rhaegar asked. He cares not for love or for blood. Doran cares for ambition, and to fuel his ambition, he's willing to see anyone pay a price, anyone but himself. Yaxlia said bitterly. The images changed once more. Yakia, younger and healthier, laying in the arms of a young Dornish man, the two of them kissing and the princess looking far happier than he'd ever seen her. "We should run away together," Yak said to the young man. "Your brothers would kill me were I to run with you." The man replied, "You would not die for me?" Yax with a smile, "If you would but ask it of me, my love." "I'd never do it. I'd not see you harmed, Garrison. Never. I wish things could be different." Yak said sadly, "One day, perhaps," Garrison replied. Again the images changed, and this time it was Doran talking to the young man, though now he was a little older. "You still love my sister?" Doran asked. "I've always loved her, and always will, my prince, though I know it can never be." Garrison said, "As long as you are aware of that, I have no quarrel with you, Sir Garrison." Doran said and offered the man a drink, which he took. Richard and the others watched on as the man choked and spluttered. Jack's lips curled into a snarl as they saw the young man die. Then, just like that, the candle went out, Jay leaning back against the chair as if he was exhausted. Soon, though, he was standing to his feet, and it was clear it was anger alone which had given him the energy to do so. Jay pacing up and down, yet saying nothing, and Richard trying to make sense of all he'd seen. Doran was against them, so much so that he'd tried to kill Margaery, though why Jay had seen fit to look at Aaliyah's past was something he wasn't clear on. He tried to think, to let his mind play out the events, and suddenly the whispers his lips had brought him began preying on his mind. Quentyn had gone to the Stormlands, and the other half of the Dornish army hadn't marched. Why? What was Doran's plan? When was it to take place, and how could they stop it? These were the thoughts that filled his mind as he saw Jade push past all the others and head toward him at the front of the tent. "My king." "Out of my way," Jane said angrily, his voice tight as he seemed to be trying to hold himself back. "My king." "Out of my way." Jack said, and though he wanted to, he knew he could not. They needed to speak, and so he held up his hand to ask Jaddy to stay. He saw it then, the rage beneath the surface, and yet he did his best to stand his ground. "Please, my king. A moment." "Out of my fucking way," Jane said, and as he moved against him, Richard moved away, only for Jay to fall to the ground. They sat around the bed and waited for him to wake, Walder having come in and been the one to tell them he needed to rest. He spoke to Jaime and to the others, finding out the young man they'd seen had been Sir Garrison Fowler, Lord Franklin's younger brother, Arthur, telling him the man had died before Harrenhal and the princess had taken it badly. When he heard about the mummery that Illyrio had tried to do, he'd been stunned. Jiri had told him about the mummer's dragon, but they'd both assumed he was in Essos, the fat cheesemonger's game, far more advanced than they'd thought. It was when he began speaking to them of his whispers that Jax looked up, the rage still there in his eyes, but he seemed more restrained. After giving him some water and watching as he got to his feet, Richard readied for some recriminations. While he'd not actually stopped him from leaving, he'd almost done so that there were only trusted men in the tent, perhaps a saving grace. "Forgive me, my king, I needed to speak to you most urgently," he said. "You I can forgive, Sir Richard. Others I cannot." Jane said he didn't need to say anything more. "Tell me what you're so worried about." He told him it all, even though they still hadn't seen the full extent of Doran's plans. Listening as Jay then told him what he knew of Oberyn and Quentyn, Richard looked on as Jay walked to the table and looked at the map, the king seeming to nod to himself as he saw what Richard and the others did not. "Lord Yang may take the army and march to King's Landing, Sir Richard. Travel with him and reach out to find out how my uncles have fared against the Vale." "Do you have your candle with you?" Jay asked. "I do. Can you use it still?" "I thought there was a cooldown." "Your Grace?" "Only on the black candles that are used. Mine own will be out of action for some time. Yours and Marjorie's will not," Jack said. "Your Grace? What are your plans?" Sir Barristan asked. "Firstly, I'm going to speak to my sister. Then I intend to spear a snake," Sir Barristan. Jade said as he walked from the tent. "The God's Eye 29.8 AC. Jaxiaris Targaryen." He looked into the glass candles and saw nothing for some time before the images began to appear. Around him, his Kingsguard and Jaime watched on, and while they saw it, he could feel it. The hatred, the disgust, Doran Martell thought him a disgrace, a dishonor to his house and his sister. Jay could feel his glee as he made his deal with the Dark Star, his eagerness as he so casually spoke about the potential death of his wife. To Doran, Marjorie was nothing, less than nothing. He felt no emotion from the man as he asked the Dark Star to kill her. That he then felt nothing about going back on his agreement with Sir Geralt wasn't a surprise. The prince was a snake, a true one. He needed to see more to find out what else the man was planning. He would put an end to each and every one of his plots and schemes. And then to the man himself. Jadeseer could feel his anger rise, his temper on the verge of making him explode. The images changed over and over again, showing him meaningless conversations as he realized he had lost focus. He'd let his anger cloud his mind, and for this, he needed to be calm. When he saw her, he almost cried, this woman who had called him her son and been taken from him like so much of his family. Gozio and his father liked each other, but there was no love there. He could feel that clearly now. When he'd seen her before, he'd not understood, not felt it himself fully. Now, though, he knew what love felt like, how his father's heart beat that much faster when his mother was around, just as his own did when he was with Marjorie. "My brother is the true snake you should fear, Rhaegar." As he heard Iadla speak of Doran, it was with concern for his father in her voice. Concern but not worry, not panic. That was the difference. He knew that now. When you loved someone, thought them in danger, or feared you may lose them, you panicked. Your worries intensified, and your smallest fears became so much larger when the person you loved was involved. Adelasia warned his father about Doran, but that fear and panic wasn't there in her voice. He watched as the images changed again. Elia was now laying on a bed with a young man, a smile on her face as he stroked her hair, and she, his chest. Both of them were fully clothed, and it was innocent enough. But he felt it then. The love, the increased beatings of both their hearts. They were so young, and for Jay, it reminded him so much of himself and Marjorie that he feared he may lose the image. Trying to put Marjorie out of his mind, he concentrated as hard as he could to keep the other image in front of him. "You would not die for me?" Ellie asked, with a smile. Jon smiled as he listened to them, watched them, felt them. He knew now who this man was, as he heard them speak. A man he'd read about but knew nothing of. This was the love she'd lost, the future she had wished for, and that had been denied to her. Even after that loss, she would not deny his father the same chance for happiness. Oberyn had said Elia was too good for this world, and even had he not agreed at the time, seeing her now, feeling what she felt, it was clear that she had been. The images changed once more. The same man sitting this time with Doran, and Jay felt it once more. Contempt, disgust, hatred. Doran felt for this man how he felt for Jay. He was an obstacle, something to be removed from the board, and nothing more. Had this been a green dream then? Jay would have shouted at the man. Not to drink the offered wine. Alas, it was not, and shouting in a tent full of people at a candle would not only be pointless, but it may raise questions that his actions may have raised enough today. Instead, he watched on as the man drank, and as the light went from his eyes. Jay's features were less controlled than they had been. He knew as he could feel the snarl on his face. When the images stopped, he fell back exhausted. Though that was mainly from the sheer effort of holding in how he felt so he could see, the moment he felt able, he jumped to his feet and went to leave. He burned Doran to the ground to get to him, set the water gardens ablaze just to see Doran burn. Jax Stockry, Arthur Baristan, and even Loras spoke. They tried to get him to steady himself, and yet they could not. Jay pushing past them, and only when Richard wouldn't let him pass did he pause. What was said he couldn't remember, only that he fell and woke up with them all around him. Jay looking up at an apologetic Richard, who at least seemed to have something to add to what he'd seen, and hadn't tried to stop him simply because of what he may do. Listening on, he began to see it more clearly. The army not having traveled, Quentyn trying to get the Dornish to meet up with the Mummer Dragon and the Golden Company. Good luck with that, he thought with a smirk as he looked down on the map. The Reach was wide open, the Marcher Lord had ridden to battle, and Tolly was here with him. An army would have free passage to Highgarden, he thought as his fingers traced the map. Jay turned to walk from the tent, his rage simmering and his focus clear. Firstly, I'm going to speak to my sister, then I intend to spear a snake. Sarah Barristan, he said after giving his orders to Jaime and the others. He walked to his sister, Arthur, and Loras walking behind him, and when he found her, she was resting, though her eyes were wide open and it was physical rest and not sleep. His sister needed, leaning against her head. He closed his eyes and opened their link. Their conversation was for them and them alone. He's betrayed us worse than we think, Rick. He tried to have Margaery killed. I believe he's going to try to do so again, but his betrayal runs deeper than that. I saw a little brother. I felt as you felt. My mother, she was happy, Jay. See, I've seen her that way before, with Egg, with me, sometimes with Father. She was happy too, but not like that. I want to burn him, Ryu. I want to fly and burn him. Why? Why would that make me a monster? Is it not right I feel this way? I want him dead, Jay. He is my kin, but ask it of me, and I'll burn him for you. I'd never do it, he said aloud, repeating Axlia's words, and feeling Rox's approval as she moved against him. He stayed with her for some time and then walked back to his tent, a plan now forming in his head. When he arrived back, he found Richard had brought his glass candle, and so he sat down, not really sure where to begin, as he cut his hand and let the blood flow over the candle. He needed to speak to Margaery, to Garland, to ready them for what may come, but more than that, he needed to know where and when the Dornish army would march. His mind was flittering between the two as he looked at the candle. Whether that was the reason for what he saw, he couldn't be sure. But it wasn't Margaery he saw, nor was it the Dornish army that Doran intended to use to place her in danger. Instead, it was Doran himself. He was speaking to Quentyn, and then to his large Norvosi guard. Areo Hota, the man was called, a man utterly loyal to Doran. Oberyn had told him once. Next he saw Doran sitting in a room. The malevolence that he felt coming from the man was palpable. The phrase he heard was like a dagger to his heart. A snake at his back, and a knife to the throat of the woman he wished to name his queen. He felt the change as he gripped the table, the images in front of him flashing, and then he saw it. She was being held on a balcony, a man gripping her by the hair, a knife in his hand, and as he looked on the knife moved across Margaery's throat. No, he screamed at the top of his lungs. He didn't see Jaime, or Arthur, Barristan, or Richard, none of them. Nor did he feel Loras when he gripped his hands, or Brienne as she tried to help him. Even Walder was not able to pull his grip from the table, as he held on, and then he saw nothing but 1,000 doors opening at once as his eyes went white. 1,000 eyes in one as a dragon roared from outside the tent and across Westeros animals as one made their own angered noises. During 28 AC, Arianne. Quentyn, leaving, had caught her by surprise. She'd not thought her father to be stupid enough to send her brother to carry out any true part of his plan. Her eyes had been on others, Sora Gascoigne, Sora Manfrey, Maester Miles and Ricasso, Elise Lady Bright, and Ario. Arianne had felt that her father would use smarter, cleverer people than her brother.